How optimistic are people in Israel, especially the hostage families? I know you've been in contact with people in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem this morning. How optimistic are they that this could be the beginning of the end?
Well, I think everyone, pretty much the entire country, is optimistic that it could be the beginning of the end. There's a lot of dispute about, is this the right method? I mean, it's very obvious that Hamas has not accepted all of the terms of Trump's offer. Despite that, for whatever reason, mainly Trump wants a Nobel Prize, Trump has decided that they did, whether or not Hamas actually accepted all those terms. But I think the most important thing as an Israeli right now is the return of those hostages. That has been the top of the list of everything that the people of Israel from left to right want to see. And for the first time, we actually saw that Hamas is willing to make some kind of agreement that will see the release of all the hostages
in one go.
In one go, which is what should have happened from the beginning. Now, what that looks like after the fact, I mean, we know already, based on the statements of Abu Marzouk, senior Hamas official, that they have not accepted demilitarization. They have not accepted a removal from any role in governance, which is an absolute necessity. Those are things that will have to be negotiated further. But we have a good starting basis, and if we can get those hostages home, that's a big win.
So everyone's been on a bit of a journey here. So the Israeli government, or certainly elements of the government, said until recently, we want to annex 80% of the West Bank. We want to, perhaps have Jewish settlements again in the Gaza Strip. We want to move the population elsewhere. I mean, these are all ideas that we've been discussed quite openly by Smotrich and Ben Gvir and the Israeli cabinet. And suddenly Trump comes along and says, no, there will be no annexation. You will not have settlements in the Gaza Strip. So he has moved. They seem to have, kept quiet about this. And in the same vein, Hamas, having said we're not going to release all the hostages in one go, and arguably they should have done that months ago, if not years ago, should never have taken them in the first place, they've suddenly said this as well. So why have these two extreme sides suddenly moved to what is a slightly more reasonable position, do you think?
Well, I think that it's undeniable that Israeli military pressure did make a difference, that the war did make a difference in terms of negotiations. This is also, of course, the support of President Trump for Israeli actions. That did move the needle to some extent. Is it enough? That remains to be seen. There's just too much up in the air in terms of what these negotiations will actually spell out in the end. But in terms of the far right in Israel, I do want to emphasize that Ben Gvir and Smotrich do not represent even the mainstream right. No. That's very, very important to know.
But they are in the government, and they have been there for a long time, and they're holding the prime minister hostage.
That's right. Yeah, it's a very concerning trend. But the idea of a full annexation or settlements in Gaza, that was at all points of this war was pretty much a fringe opinion. There was not mainstream support for this opinion of putting settlements in Gaza. That's not really something we want to see. And also the displacement of Palestinians. This is something that was done in order to conduct fighting operations inside of Gaza rather than to move them permanently outside of Gaza, which I think is fair. We want to see less Palestinians in harm's way, which is something that Hamas has fought every step of the way. They want to see ultimately more Palestinian casualties because that works to their political advantage, tragically.
Right, but we also know that the Israeli government or the IDF has been telling people to move out of harm's way and then has bombed them anyway, right? So that has happened quite consistently in the last 2 years.
Israel has never targeted civilians intentionally. I think that when you're talking about urban warfare, you have a very, very difficult situation, especially when you're dealing with a terrorist organization that is embedding in humanitarian zones, that has fired rockets and missiles from those zones, and it's hard to differentiate when you're fighting an enemy that dresses as civilians.
Right. So is this a big win for Netanyahu, or is there peril for him as well here politically, inside Israel?
I actually think it's both. I think the return of the hostages is obviously a huge political, beyond the humanitarian aspect, which comes first and foremost. It is a political win for Netanyahu, but again, it's too early to say what's going to happen politically. I mean, Israeli politics can change in a second, even right before elections. So we need to see what happens with negotiations in terms of governance. As I said, we're seeing a lot of opposition from the far right right now because Hamas did not agree to this ceasefire. They did not agree to the terms. So a lot of things are still up in the air, but negotiations is a great starting point, especially if we're talking about the full release of all hostages.
But, both sides have not agreed to everything in the 20-point plan. So, there was, I think it's point 19. I've mentioned it before. In the 20-point plan, this is the Trump plan, which talks about a path to statehood and self-determination. And then Netanyahu was on the record almost immediately afterwards speaking in Hebrew to an Israeli audience, there will never be a Palestinian state. In the same vein, Hamas has, in a very cleverly worded statement that they released overnight, said we're going to release the hostages, but, there are lots of ifs and buts about the final settlement. So both sides are hedging their bets. And that's, I guess, where the peril lies for this, right?
Yeah, of course. And I think it's also important to remember that when we're talking about a Palestinian state, I mean, the majority of the Israeli public wouldn't be opposed to a Palestinian state if there was actually a leadership that's capable of governance. And that's been the problem for many decades, that the Palestinian leadership is very divided amongst themselves. I mean, no one hates Hamas more than Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, who have had conflicts, physical conflict with the Hamas leadership for many years. And so that needs to change. We need to see viable leadership that is committed to peace, and we haven't really seen that.
And, I mean, of course, the people in the Gaza Strip would say Israel has not helped to create the conditions in which such a leadership can come about, because if you keep bombing people, that radicalizes them more than, whatever they're taught in their schools or their mosques. I just wonder whether this could actually be what a friend of mine in Israel calls, the Belfast moment, where after all the misery and the bloodshed and the horror of the last 2 years, with both sides not really appreciating the degree of horror happening on the other side, whether this could result in something positive. I mean, could it be, the beginnings of peace in the Middle East?
I mean, I really hope so, but ultimately I think we're not going to see a genuine change in the Middle East until you deal with the head of the octopus, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, which first and foremost is persecuting their own people. But they're also very committed.
They're much less powerful than they were. I mean, thanks to Israel.
Absolutely.
And the United States.
We know that they use every opportunity to rebuild and restock. And so that is the concern. We've already seen them acting in Sudan to rebuild a terror proxy there. They still have Hezbollah. They still have the Houthis, who have been firing ballistic missiles at me in Tel Aviv over and over again. So this is a genuine threat. So I think peace in the Middle East broadly is a bit of a stretch. We see a lot of rhetoric right now, especially from President Trump, because, again, that Nobel Prize is really what he's after.
But also, it is, I mean, I remember, quite a few of Israeli friends of mine, including people who are very senior in the military, who tend to demonstrate against Netanyahu when those demonstrations are taking place. They said, until you give the Palestinians a horizon of dignity, which probably involves an independent nation state, something they can call their own, something that is viable, you will not get anywhere. And that is what they did. That's the least they deserve, right? So that is the only way to take the sting of toxic extremism out of the Palestinian community. Give them something they can call their own.
I don't agree with that at all, I have to say, because the incitement and the level of radicalization in Palestinian society is very, very extreme. Some of that is a result of the political situation, but a lot of it, unfortunately, isn't. We know that the Palestinian leadership has rejected a state multiple times. That is their legacy. Palestinian rejectionism is the heart of the movement. And until we see leadership, courageous leadership, that's actually ready to change that reality, we're not going to see a shift on the ground in the Palestinian Authority.
And they were promised something in the Oslo Accords, and that never came about. I just wonder, at the end of this we're at bottom basement when it comes to misery. We have rejected, hopefully, the option of genocide. We've rejected, hopefully, the option of ethnic cleansing. Palestinians are not going to move anywhere. There are 5.3 million of them. They want to stay where they are right now, however much the place has been trashed in Gaza, however much it's pockmarked by settlements in the West Bank. At the end of the day, although it's not a very fashionable thing to say, a two-state solution is the only way forward, isn't it?
I do think that in the long term, that's the only solution, and that's something I have long advocated. Unfortunately, the reality is right now we don't really have anyone who's capable of sustaining that state, even internally.
But what are you prepared to do to tease them out? What's Israel prepared to do?
It's not up to us. It's up to Palestinians
to determine. To you, but you're creating the conditions in which extremism thrives.
No, absolutely not. The Palestinian Authority is responsible for that. It's the Palestinian Authority who's paying millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars every year for pay for slay. They're rewarding Palestinian terrorists from their what they call martyrs fund, who are serving time for, in many cases, life sentences. I mean, incitement in the Palestinian Authority, not just Hamas, is long standing. It's entrenched in society at every single level, and a lot of that wrapped up in straight up anti-Semitism as well. That is not Israel's responsibility.
But, well, I mean, I would beg to differ on that. But at some stage, if you want to live next to your neighbours and you don't want them to want to kill you, some of that responsibility falls on Israel as well, doesn't it?
Of course, some of that responsibility falls on Israel, but at the end of the day, it's the Palestinians who have rejected it every step of the way. I mean, even if you're looking at the League of Nations and the opportunity that was afforded to them then, they rejected that. They rejected that because they didn't want the existence of Israel. That is the core of the issue.
But the Oslo Accords, that changed, didn't it? There was an acceptance of Israel, the recognition of the Israeli state, and there was a pathway to a Palestinian state, and that got flummoxed, that got frustrated for a number of reasons, and they're not all Palestinians.
I don't agree with that at all, actually. I think when it comes to the problems with the Oslo Accords, really what destroyed this was the Second Intifada, which saw the death of thousands of civilians and a lot of role of Hamas, by the way, back to Hamas. So I don't think that you can put this on Israel. The rejection of peace and the rejection
Not
even
entirely,
of a Palestinian state was coming from the Palestinian leadership from day one. And it's not going to change until they are ready to accept a two-state solution themselves.
Indeed. Let's end on a positive note, if we can. What out of 10, what chances do you give a sort of permanent, more peaceful settlement?
Oh, I don't know if that could be a positive note today, but it's too early to say. I would say in terms of the hostages, I would give it an 8. I'm feeling very optimistic, and that is at the front of everyone's hearts today. Overall, too early to say. I'm going to go with a 5 for now.
Okay, that's okay. That's non-committal. Emily Schrader, thank you very much for coming into the studio.